CEO of North America for Cadas Smart Door Locks. Been in the industry now, as Lee said, several years in the lock industry and in the smart home integrator industry for almost 22 years. So it's been quite a while.
And myself, Leo Dess, with a company called Access Control Executive Brief. I cover the access control and smart lock industry globally. There's about 430 companies in our industry, so I write about the industry, the trends, and try to bring some insights into what's happening within the industry itself. So it's with great privilege to be here. I was actually telling Nick, last time I was here was in 2007 when I was in Denver, and so it's been a while since I've been back to CEDIA, but it's great to be back. So we'll jump into it. So up until now, I'd like to talk about that we've not actually had smart locks. And the reason why is what we've had, and sorry, there's no screen, so I'm gonna have to look just to keep on pace. So what we've had here though is mechanical locks. So if you look at the history of how the industry has gone, you've had non-motorized, non-electrified locks, and they were called mechanical locks. Then the industry took those same ones and they motorized them. So a lot of times you see these door openers in the commercial space that would, the same products, put a motor, a little bit of tweaks, but they opened on that end. Then from there, what they did was they put an antenna in these mechanical motorized locks, and then they called them, this clicker sucks. Had an AV, there we go. Did it go? There we go. And then we called them connected. And frankly, we took those antennas and we connected them to some systems, which we'll get into on that end. And then from there, we literally took the exact same connected motorized mechanical locks and we did some marketing and we called them smart. And what happened is here though, is that the value proposition of what the marketplace was looking for of a actual smart lock, we haven't necessarily delivered up until now. And that's why we're at a pretty good delineation point because of what's happening around digital transformation, the enterprise software. There's a lot of things that are coming into play that are now causing the opportunity for it to be a smart lock. So what I like to call that period of what we have is actually digital locks. And I know I'm a little bit of semantics, but when you think about the marketplace of the expectations that consumers have, especially in the CEDIA realm, the expectation is that these products are delivering far more value, in my opinion, than what we've seen and what our expectations are of a smart lock. I lost it, yeah. What's going on here? Well, all right, we're back. Not like technical difficulties. So, but what I want to make sure that we understand is that this is not a conversation about how connected locks are bad and smart locks are good or the other. It's actually a conversation about the products themselves are for a purpose. And what we should do is build to what is the smart lock, what the industry is looking for, or the end user, the customers are looking for on that side. And it's an opportunity that, in my opinion, in looking at all the companies that provide smart locks or provide connected locks, there's a different buyer type that is looking for them to act a certain way, and you have companies now in the space that are actually building products that you would consider smart. And what I'm hoping is that we start to label these products what they are so that we don't confuse the marketplace. But it's not a conversation about this or that. We like to have those binary conversations, especially in the niche smart lock, digital lock industry. But what we need to have is an and conversation, because I actually think they all serve a purpose of what somebody's looking for. So we talk about a little bit of a history of how we got here. This was actually the first lock that was invented. It was in Iran, and what you had is you actually had a key, you stuck your hand through a hole, and you pushed up on the cylinders, if it would, and it moved the wood, and that's how you unlock the door. So not the most secure thing, but you had to have that key in order for it to work. As you can see, they would put an extra key up on top just so. Actually, what's interesting to me is that since that time, we've been sending and selling locks with 2 keys. There seemed to be like a trend throughout the history. So from there, what you had is it became metal, and the same type of lock was there with the same type you see on the right on the side here. Yale actually introduced an actual metal version of what you saw before. Then what you saw here is you have actually the introduction of a key as an example in 1856. Then what I would say at the time was considered the first smart lock was actually Sargent, who had a built-in time clock. So you could say 8 o'clock every single day, have the door unlock. And that was very far advanced for, if you could think back, from wooden things that we were sticking into locks. And this wasn't actually, like, this wasn't 1970. This was like early days of what's going on. So then you had Ving come around. Those of you familiar, if you look at your hotel keys that you currently have now, those have evolved from what's pretty much, think of it like data on card, to where the smarts were on the card. You'd get this thing. It wasn't terribly that smart if you think about it, because the actual code of how you would get into the lock was built into where the actual holes were. There was some smarts on it, especially as things progressed to where the intelligence of the lock would actually be updated. Still see it today in hotels that you see now, but it was the beginning of what you could see where intelligence were coming from the lock from like a central point to where you then could control who has access when shouldn't people have, little identified keys that would help people get through. Then you saw some evolution into keypad locks. We went from keypad locks to Bluetooth locks to back of the door Bluetooth locks. So, and you would think that it wasn't necessarily that much innovation, but there actually was a lot that went into this. With the idea being is I was going to take the intelligence of what you had, put it in the back of the locks, and then there was actually an entire software suite that came along with it to update this. So some evolutions that you can see that got us to here. Now, what I'd like to talk about though is actually the burden of our industry has been placed upon like a 3-inch hole for us to solve. And actually you can see today, Masonite has some products that are here to where we're actually starting to solve the door problem that we have of an industry, but there hasn't been a ton of innovation at all on the door side. It's primarily been around the lock, and we then continued to build that by bringing in the connected antennas that we set into those locks that we had before that were like electrified, back of the door, in front of the door, keypads and the rest, to where then you had Z-Wave and Zigbee, now we have Matter, then we connected them to the home systems that were here. But if you think about it, would you define those as smart? And I'll make this a little interactive. I mean, would you define that as smart? It's an evolution, but if you look at it, it's been somewhat incremental over the years from what's been built back from the early 1800s and earlier before that on the end. And again, it's not that it's bad, right? Because what you actually had was, it's the beginnings of what you see happening to smart, because a lot of what it's done is it took a lot of the functionality and we've now shifted that to the actual systems that are now controlling the lock. So it's almost like a remote control in a lot of ways. So we went from you had to go up to the lock to do it. We had a brief stint there to where you replicated everything into the actual phone itself. But then really what you've done is you've now taken these systems that like the home systems, whether it's Ring or whomever, Control 4, the rest of them, to actually control the locks. And it's primarily been a remote control. And again, it served the purpose of what someone was looking for on that end. But I said this earlier, but I think by the way we've defined these locks is the consumer has wanted a low-cost, high-value product. And what they've gotten when it comes to the smart side is a high-cost, low-value product that if we defined it properly, like we're going to talk about, and brought the smarts to it, we would see a consumer that is actually looking for not a connected product, but actually smart. And so we'll get into this part of it. So we've got Nick here to have a conversation, if you would, about, so as we move from what is a connected product, again, or call it a remote control from the existing products that's there, how do we define and what is a smart lock?
Thank you. Yeah, so really the evolution needs to be thinking of the smart lock as something that is part of a home automation system, something that enhances that system, but then something that can also become an ecosystem unto itself. So, for example, we have a lock in our booth right now at the Cadas booth that is a Wi-Fi video doorbell deadbolt lock. So it has biometric fingerprint access. It has two-way voice capability. It does a lot of the functionality, and it becomes smart at that point because it takes what Lee said, a remote control device, and actually becomes smart. It actually is allowing you to interact with it, allowing you to speak through it and do those sort of things. So that's the evolution. And as we talked about, at Codis, we do have what we would say are smart locks or connected products, but we're trying to push that envelope, trying to make them become smart so that they fulfill the billing that they have as being smart.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to this concept and the idea that in a lot of ways we were separating and treating software as a feature of hardware, when in fact what's happening now is companies are starting to treat hardware and software equally, to where you wouldn't treat it as just an addition to functionality. It's actually a core part of the actual product itself that's being built. And because of that, you're starting to see advancements inside the locks that you didn't before, when if you were to, say, motorize those locks and connect them, but move the smarts over to a third-party ecosystem to go do that, functionality actually, you create problems that if you're able to control the hardware and the software side, you actually can build a far more advanced product, which then brings you things like this that Nick's talked about before, but things like situational awareness. That lock starts to understand what's happening at the door, where historically you didn't have that. You really had no sensors, you didn't have any of that stuff. It also allows it to be more proactive. So understanding the situation, we call it the okay, now what scenario. And a lot of times the connected locks themselves would say door ajar. It would just send it out. And then it would leave it to another system to have to figure out what to do with that information. To where now the locks themselves are being built in with the functionality to be able to respond to whatever that situation is and be proactive. Whether it's sending notifications to the proper person, like it knows that if I'm inside the house, it knows to let me know whether, or if I'm outside the house. There's a lot that it can do once it starts to understand the situation, and it has advanced software with the hardware, and it's built with it all in mind. So, next, sorry. It's okay. You know, as you talked about, there's a clear difference, and it's okay. And it's not, again, not a case of one being better than the other. And I would say to come take a look, because you could actually see the functionality. And as if you're in the integration channel and you're taking this to market, what it does provide you is a lot more optionality to serve the customer greater. So what we'd like to do is, though, if you believe the assumptions that we've moved from connected to smart, and you do believe that the advancements are starting to happen, and I would recommend that you go take a look at that, what we wanted to do was to leave you with 3 actions of things that you can do to take that information and apply it back into the marketplace for yourself. So I'll leave Nick, if you would, you go first.
Absolutely. So I think key takeaway number 1 for me is dealers need to include locks in the systems that are sold. So kind of taking a step back, but if you look at historically attachment rates of locks to home automation systems has stayed relatively low. So I think what drives innovation is when consumers interact with a product and they start to demand more from that product. So having a historically maybe 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 door lock included with a system, the integrators are leaving opportunity on the table to include the door lock, build out that ecosystem, but then also help to drive the innovation through the consumer interaction. Because if consumers say, hey, I love how the lock does this, but can it also do that? That will help drive that innovation. But right now, with it only being, like I said, like a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 product, too often that product is left out of the system and we're left wanting more.
And the last one that he had on here too, I think is important. I think if you were to take a look over like what I've seen over the past, call it 15 years, of the difference in the change here, is that there is an opportunity in the marketplace for folks like yourself and the companies like yourself to lead this change. And with that, in order for it to happen, my 3 takeaways are to reimagine the art of the possible, what the lock can do. Because we've had these sort of connected locks that have had the functionality of how they're built and what they've done, it's frankly, we've done a really good job of delivering on that straightforward value proposition, to where I think you have a new opportunity here to take these products to be sort of a lead sell into what might be an experience that a homeowner is looking for. So whether that's looking for more security, privacy, entertainment, awareness, whatever the reason is from the technology that they want, the smart lock now that you are able to bring into the marketplace can serve that market a whole lot better than when before when it was just a connected lock. The other one is on the curiosity side. From what I find is that there needs to be a new conversation that's happening and to be far more curious about what the locks can do, as well as drive the expectations of what these locks should do back through the manufacturers themselves. Because if they're getting the requests from you, they will start to build the locks with the feature sets that you do need. If you all treat this as a 1 in 10 install sale on what you have, you're going to get a 1 in 10 product back to you, because there's other marketplaces that, frankly, they serve that are providing the feedback to build a product that is needed for the market. And it's your opportunity, in my opinion, to go do that. And then lastly, I think there's not a better time right now in the smart lock and the access control industry to where we're seeing the demand of our products increase substantially, because there's a desire to have two things in the market. Consumers want to have both safety and convenience. We've been an industry whose entire value proposition has historically been about keeping bad people out, and there's an entirely new use case, which is letting the right people in. And the way that the locks function is far different when it's about letting the right people in. If you think about what's happening in delivery right now, that is not keeping bad people out. That's about letting the right people in. And that's not going to be solved by putting barriers up to keep people out. That's actually going to be built by bringing smarts into the products to take that situational awareness that we talked about to be able to deliver the value of what the consumer wants. And it's the lock industry's basically space that they can command, because we've been delivering for the past hundreds of years, keeping bad people out. So we can solve that. We now need the people to help let the right people in. And the products are being built to go do that. And I think it's CEDIA's opportunity, the industry itself, to go lead that. The other reason why, majority of the locking industry has been built, their identity has been built around keeping bad people out. Our entire industry is looking for a dealer and a channel that is going to help solve the consumers that are looking for to let the right people in. So it's an opportunity there for you all.
And I think that's key when you say that, having conversations with people here and outside, talking about access control, right? Somebody actually said to me today, like, oh, it's interesting you use that. That's more of a commercial term. So, and I said, yeah, that's the way people need to think about it. Like Lee said, it's not about just keeping bad people out. It's about who has access and controlling that, because you may want to let someone in, but the perception or the mindset of a lock is keeping people out. So it's about turning that into access control in a residential environment.
Especially too, if you do multifamily or do other marketplaces like that too, huge opportunity on that end as well. So we wanted to open up, is there any questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, can't hear you, I'm sorry. It's not on.
Locks, when the bolt is engaged, is it indicating that the bolt is engaged in the door frame as opposed to just the bolt is engaged?
That's part of what we're talking about, is that the next evolution is that with a door sensor to know whether the door is ajar or it's open or it's closed, that's where we need to get to and evolve it from there. So it's not just a lock problem, it's a door problem as well. So we need to get together and solve that. And I think that's the next evolution of where we need to go to make them smarter so that they do provide that information to you.
Why has that been such a barrier for so many years?
It's an access thing. It's a power at the door. It's a sensor for the door that's integrated with the lock. So in hinges, there's a lot of ways to solve that. But I think that's where the demand has to drive that behavior so that the manufacturers do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my belief around why it's happened. There's probably a lot of reasons too. But so typically the lock has been developed as a single product and not necessarily as a system with, say, the keep where the bolt goes into. And you need to have both of those sensors in order for it to know that it's actually extended and then engaged inside the keep itself. But you're starting to see more of that product and idea to where it's a system more than a single point sale. My opinion is that also the lock industry, not just on your end, but just overall, has been primarily a retail sale on the consumer side. Is that fair?
100%.
Right? So it's been sold as a single product, not as a system. And I think that's why also it's an opportunity for this market, because you all are typically selling systems. We've just not necessarily always delivered a product that was built as a system. It worked with systems, it wasn't necessarily a system. And back to what he's saying about the difference between connected and smart, that hardware and software development process, which is changing, is developing a system now. Because it's also really, up until recently, if you had the key, you got in, right? You could use, it didn't know. Now with biometrics and these other things, it's actually becoming more advanced on the authentication of understanding who the person is, understanding situation, being able to communicate better. It's a system more than an isolated product that is now built to work with a system. Yeah, totally fair. Yeah, and the good news is, companies like theirs, there's other companies, they're working on solving that currently now. Where historically that has been a problem, but it has, the purpose of the product that was built was that it was engaged and closed, and then it kept people out. It's new use cases are being driven to be solved. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, great. Oh,
I was just wondering, obviously, talking about like smart locks and the conversation about the smart element of locking and the additional value-added features that can provide to the customers, to the end users. And in like specifically in multifamily residential, I think there's been a trend, well, previously it's been more about offline locks, right? Because a cost element, keeping costs down, and keeping management of like battery power and stuff like that down. So with this move towards providing more advanced functionality, it requires in itself a move towards like online connected locks. And I wondered how you see that in the residential multifamily space, if that's reflected with a trend and acceptance for either a higher price point, like reflecting the requirements of the users and the residents in those properties. Is that pickup increasing, and that like change between offline and online locks is kind of switching over?
I think that's where it's happening first, is because multifamily developers are saying, I want to offer more solutions to my renters or to the people in my spaces. So yes, that's actually driving a lot of the innovation, is through that. And then that will carry over kind of backwards into a single family residential as you see the enhancements. So you may rent an Airbnb, you may go somewhere and say, wow, that was a really cool lock, or that was a cool experience, or we were locked out, we made one phone call and they remotely let us in. That's kind of what's going to drive a lot of that, because as multifamily developers try to attract new renters and new people to come to their space, they're able to spend that money and do that, whereas a single family homeowner may not know what features they want or what's available, so they don't know what to go buy until they've experienced that. So I think that will help work backwards into single family, if that answers your question.
Yeah, on my side, I think, so if you look at a multifamily building, it's not only a resident's home, but it's a business. Like there's some, right, in a lot of ways. So if you take a look at the value proposition in multifamily, historically for locks has been keeping people out. Like that's why you put them in there, especially when it was mechanical. And you had a key for people that could go in, then we moved to fobs, then maybe a PIN code on an intercom to let the right people in. And the value proposition of multifamily has shifted away from just keeping bad people out to operational efficiencies, which is like, maintenance, the ability to, frankly, when the systems work to where if someone doesn't pay rent, they turn off their key card, things like that, versus having to wait for them to bring the key or go get the key. So there's a bunch of operational efficiencies that these access control systems as a utility in the building could then provide. And then now the new one that's coming through is there's a revenue generation opportunity. So you're starting to see services be brought in. A lot of the multifamily, especially in the A class, and I think it is important to differentiate between A class, multifamily, B class, and then C, and then also it depends on where you're at in the world to what the expectations are, what they're at. But like in the A class, this services side, it's becoming more like a hospitality industry than it is a a home on that end. So because you would have, it's like I never understood it. You would have a multifamily building, actually like where I'm staying here. There's a multifamily building across the street from the hotel I'm staying in. In the hotel, I can get everything and anything that I want with the touch of a button off the telephone. In that multifamily building across the street, which realistically is a lot like the hotel I'm staying in, I can't do that. But now, delivery with e-commerce, the ability to have on-demand services like dog walking, whatever it might be, you're starting to see in multifamily revenue generation. But on top of that, the need for amenity spaces to be able to maximize those. So why have, I don't know, a gym? Say I own 4 buildings in downtown Denver, I can start to pool those resources together. One may have a gaming area, another one has a pool, another one has a gym, and I can then start to offer access. So I'm not only buying into the building that I live in, but I'm buying into a brand that happens to be in downtown. Very different value proposition than has historically been there. You're starting to now see it in the single family home, where we're going to start to see operational efficiencies be driven into the house. And that's a value proposition that me as a consumer of a lock, I'm going to start to have the expectations. And that will start to look like delivery of goods that come in. Instead of them sitting outside, they're brought into secure spaces. Maybe it's in the foyer, maybe it's in the garage, whatever it might be. I'm going to be able to start to see some of those things. You do start to see Airbnb starts to increase this revenue opportunity that didn't exist before. And the awareness and wanting to understand who's there, and the sort of the assurance side, the ability to send codes instead of leaving a key underneath a rug. There's a whole lot of efficiencies that could be delivered. So now that $200 device isn't seen as a low value, high cost. That's a great example, in my opinion, of showing high value for a cost of a product that hasn't necessarily been there before. So that's the evolution of what's changing a lot. And that's why, again, if you're selling services, there's a better opportunity to sell services now than there's ever been before. Any other questions before we leave? All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.